We're still standing. We rise in the face of every adversity. We rise to reclaim our dignity. We rise to honor our legends and our leaders. We rise to renew the hope of our people. We rise to lay hold of justice and prosperity. We rise in strength and solidarity. We rise for our children yet to be born. We rise to the glory of our Lord. We rise with a predestined victory. We rise for a better day. We shall not be erased. We rise up.
Hello and welcome. I'm Charlene Glover. I am the CEO and host of We Need a Village Again 2026 Black History Podcast. And we have a podcast designed for you in mind. We're hosting our Black History Podcast, and although Black history is important every year, it is necessary that we address specific issues this year due to some of the challenges we're facing in our Black culture. So we themed this particular podcast, Empowered to Rise, Erase Not Happening, Dismiss Impossible. We want you to mark your calendars and stay with us every Wednesday till March 4th, 7 p.m. Central Time, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Make sure you bring a friend and join the conversation. Black history is more than remembering the struggles of the past. It's more than a time of reflecting and looking backwards, but it's also about honoring our faith, our legends, and our legacy. It's a time of reflection. It's a time of celebration, reconnection, refueling, and building forward. So we've designed this podcast to educate, equip, and empower you to rise up. This year's Black History program aims to answer this prophetic moment with insight, moral clarity, and resistance. Yes, resistance and a bold proclamation to reject erasure, to reclaim truth, and to call a collective people to rise up with action. This year marks a 100th year anniversary of Black History. Black History Month began in 1926 under the leadership of Carter G. Woodson, the father of Black history. Originally established it as a Negro Week, as the Negro History Week. We now realize that his insights have come forward, and we're gleaning from his insights to understand that our freedoms are being challenged. The protections that we once had through civil rights are now being rolled back. The great struggle that many of our civil rights leaders stood and fought for, we're now witnessing the efforts to an anti-Black agenda, attempts to roll back civil rights protections, restricting voting access, censoring the teaching of our full history, and undermining equity in education and justice. These actions are not incidental. They echo the very forces that Carter G. Woodson warned about, forces that seek to blur our identity, limit our opportunity, and weaken our collective resolve. Now, before we come into this rich and robust conversation, let me just offer my disclaimer. This podcast will address some fundamental truths that will make some of you feel uneasy, while others will feel affirmed and liberated. But just know that discomfort is not the enemy of growth, it's the avoidance of truth. So listen to a wise African quote: "Until the lions have their own historians, the history of the hunt will always glorify the hunter." We're now going to own our own narrative and tell our own story. And I believe personally that knowledge is power. Knowledge is power when it's accurate and applied. Knowledge is power when it's accurate and applied. So today we focus on a powerful reality, reshaping global conversations and redefining leadership. Across the African continent, we are witnessing more than economic or political shifts. We're seeing a cultural and generational awakening that challenges outdated assumptions, policies, and repositions Africa as a driver of history, no longer a bystander. To help us understand this pivotal moment through an informed firsthand perspective, we welcome Sandra Babu-Boateng to inform us on this key topic, Africa Rising, a New Awakening. Now, Sandra Babu-Boateng, and Sandra will forgive me because I don't have an African accent or dialect, but she is a global thought leader, media entrepreneur, and a strategist working at the intersection of leadership, culture, and geopolitics. She is the co-founder of PanaGenius, a global media and experiential company reaching over 50 million people worldwide, the host of Breakdown, a fast-growing YouTube podcast delivering bold, solutions-oriented analysis on leadership, business, and global affairs with more than 5 million monthly viewers. She is also the co-creator of the Black Stars Experience, a premier multi-sector conference uniting leaders, innovators, and change makers to shape the future of talent and culture. Through her consulting firm, Babú Global, she advises governments, institutions, and corporations on trade, investment, policy, and the diaspora engagement. Born in Ghana and raised in the Bronx, Sandra graduated summa cum laude from Syracuse University, S.I. Newhouse School of Public Communications, and holds a master's in global business administration from Tufts University. Her work is driven by a clear mission to empower her generation to own their voice, lead with purpose, and build the future they deserve. Sandra, we're honored to have you join us for the Black History Podcast. Welcome. Thank you for being here. You're here. The next voice you'll hear will be Sandra and mine in the conversation to address, in particularly, Africa Rising, a New Awakening. Welcome, Sandra, to our stage.
Oh, Charlene, thank you so much for having me. And thank you for that wonderful introduction. You did a great job with the name. You were very, very, very close. So, you know, my applause to you. I'm Sandra Babu-Boateng, and it's such an honor to be here with you and your guest. And I want to just thank you for creating this powerful platform. I think if ever we've needed a village, right, it's
Yes,
now.
absolutely.
It is now. So I love your platform, and I'm thrilled to be here today.
Thank you. Well, Sandra, when we connected a month or so ago, I said to you, I'm really looking for a voice that's clear, with accurate reporting, that's trustworthy. And you are a journalist that has caught my attention to be able to follow for accurate, not just African news, global news, because you seem
Yeah.
to have an insight on all things that's happening across the globe. But in particularly, this podcast is crafted to talk about Africa, the continent of Africa, and some key things that are happening there, because I think it's essential that our audience get to hear from a credible source what's happening in Africa. So let's begin the conversation, and we'll do so by, I'm going to ask you to speak to a couple of key topics. Number one, beginning with Africa Rising, uncolonizing Africans and decolonizing the colonial system. There
Yeah.
is a real, emergence of Africa and Africans and African leaders that are decolonizing the system, that are uncolonizing their thinking. So can you speak to us about that?
Yeah, Charlene, I'm so glad that you started this conversation here, right? Because you cannot talk about Africa today without talking about Africa's past, right? The
Yes.
history of Africa. And that question that you asked about, decolonizing, right? The
Yes.
African
Mhm.
mind. What does that mean? a lot of my work is centered around that. I started this podcast because I wanted to really help shift mindset, right? Not just Africans, back home, but, Africans in the diaspora, Black Americans, the entire global Black world. This moment demands for that, right? And so in my view, decolonization is the most urgent and consequential work ahead for Africans today. And it's not because we're stuck in the past, right? But I think too much of our present is still shaped by it. So much of it is shaped of what's happening today is shaped by it. And one of the things that I often say is that the tragedy is no longer what happened to Africa, right? The tragedy is what we're still failing to build today with what we have.
Yes.
And when we talk about uncolonizing, Africans, it's not just about rewriting history books, although that's very, very important, right? But I'm talking about rewriting mindsets. I'm talking about examining the assumptions that we've inherited about power, about legitimacy, about development, and even ourselves, Charlene, even ourselves, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And really deciding which ones are we finally ready to outgrow. And this is not just for Africa, this is for the global Black world.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And yes, go ahead, Charlene.
One of the things that I am kind of picking up on in my African news through you and one other source, in particularly that Africans, but the continent of Africa with key African leaders are leading out with understanding that Africa is sovereign. It's a sovereign nation. It's a sovereign continent. So no longer are leaders waiting to be told what to do or give a hand out. But they want to sit at the table as partners. Speak about that.
Yeah, they do want to sit at the table as partners. And, there are three fundamental things that are happening here. It's psychological, it's economic, and it's also cultural, right? So psychologically, you have Africans wanting to teach the real history of Africa, teaching African children their history, and that it did not start with colonization, right? A big part of reclaiming the future is about understanding who we were before the colonizers arrived, right?
Absolutely.
And so there's more awareness of that. And I have to say that social media today has made that so much easier. Is the reason why I can have my platform, right? And educate people and bring our rich history to our global community. And so there's a growing interest in rediscovering Africa, instead of just going off of what we've been told about the continent. So psychologically, you see that's happening. People are beginning to center African innovation and empires and science and trade in our systems of education. And then also economically, what's happening is, as you pointed out, the shift in mindset from a mindset of extraction to a mindset of ownership. And that's a really, really critical one, because for centuries, colonial systems trained Africans to see Europe primarily as the center of legitimacy, right? And then Western validation as sort of the highest form of success. So that's why we are exporting raw cocoa and cobalt and oil, right? Instead of refining and manufacturing and branding on the continent. So those models have kept Africa kind of, choked for so many years. And now leaders are beginning to say, wait a minute. No, we cannot allow this to continue happening. We must do something about it. Now, of course, this is not happening across the continent, right? And we'll talk about that later. I'll give you some examples of those who are really living up to that sovereignty, right? What it means to be sovereign in today's world. But we're seeing a shift. And that shift, I believe it's important to recognize. And it's exciting to also watch, to be, to watch, and not just watch, but to understand that we have a role to play in Africa's rise. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm excited for what I see because I believe it has a prophetic indication about Blacks all over the world, wherever the diaspora may be, that there is something stirring up as a way of redeeming us from many of the ills that have happened through
Hmm.
being enslaved and through in America the Jim Crow uh, oppression, that there's something happening. And I believe the awakening that I see in Africa speaks much larger than just the countries it's happening in, the continent, but globally.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, well, let me follow up with how do you see colonial systems,
Yeah.
the impacts that have shaped the government and education and created dependency being shifted now to where the countries that are rising up are saying, no, we're going to make sure education is premium for our children. We're going to govern our own country without permission.
Yeah.
We're not going to be dependent. We desire an interdependent relationship with other allies, but we will not be dependent upon or dictated to.
Yeah. Great question, Charlene. And to really understand the shift that's happening now, we have to understand what the model was, right?
Yeah.
We have to, and this is critical because colonialism did not end with independence. It did not. It evolved. And here's where Kwame Nkrumah, the first president of Ghana and one of the greatest Pan-Africanists of our time, truly becomes a prophet in many ways because he warned us about this in the 60s when
Yes.
we weren't paying attention, before it was even a thought, right? He warned us about it. And here's the reality that is usually missing from context when people talk about why Africa is in the current state that it is. Many African states inherited artificial borders, right? And these are borders that were created by Europeans when they carved up the continent like a piece of cake or
Mhm.
pie at
Mhm.
the 1884 Berlin Conference. This has made it difficult for Africa to unite and to move and trade with each other. And so as a result, Africa trades with, the outside world more than it trades within itself, even though we're a population, a continent of over 1.4 billion people, right?
But
And
let,
then,
let me make this statement. So it sounds like the the divide and conquer methodology has worked with Blacks everywhere because there's
hmm,
always been the mode of operation to divide and conquer. So even on the continent of Africa, you had these border states that was enforced to keep Africans from connecting to each other. Is
yes,
that right?
yes. And it is by design.
Mhm.
It is by design. And unfortunately, it's something that is still happening today,
Wow.
right? The division of our global Black family
Mhm.
is still intentionally being coordinated and facilitated, right? So it's still a problem that we need to reckon with. And it starts with, awareness. But I want to go back to, because there are three key things, right? One being the artificial borders. And the second thing being that African states inherited centralized presidential systems, right? So, what does that mean?
Yeah.
Governments transitioned from colonial governorships to strong executive rule. And so that set the stage for dictatorship, right,
Mm.
on the continent. And it is the reason why today, you have a lot of leaders, presidents, who, even though they claim to be in democratic nations, have ruled for decades, right?
Yes.
A president can stay in power for decades. And an example is Paul Biya, the 93-year-old president of
I saw
Cameroon.
that.
I mean, make it make sense for me, Charlene, please. Can you make it make sense for me?
Not at, not at
93.
all. 93 years old.
90, how do you even campaign, at 93? But that is, when we see what's happened on the continent today, we don't link it to history, right? But
Mhm.
that was what was passed down to us.
Yeah.
And then the third thing, and this is another critical one, is that African states inherited extractive tax structures that are still prevalent, believe it or not. Colonial era policies were designed to maximize revenue for European empires by taxing resource exports rather than fostering local development. And so about 14 African countries are still stuck in this system and reportedly paying about 400 to 500 billion dollars a year to France. Make that
And
make sense for me.
oh, wow. My
Make that make
God.
sense.
Yeah.
400 to 500 billion dollars a year,
That is
right?
oppression at its finest and highest, isn't it?
Yeah. And so we have to revisit that, and you put all of that together and you begin to see how Africa's future was engineered and predetermined for failure by
Yes,
colonizers. You
yes,
cannot separate that history from the past,
right.
right?
Yes.
And those systems were built to extract resources, to suppress dissent, not to foster inclusive development for African people. So when governance struggles today, that's the question that we need to ask is, was this system designed for empowerment in the first place? And
Yeah.
Charlene, the answer is no, it never was. And for me, that's where the conversation begins. What do we do now?
Where do we go from here? There is
Yes.
definitely a need for reformation. And as I see it across the globe, especially from the continent of Africa with Europe and the US, that the disruptions we're experiencing, they are very, very frustrating. They're overwhelming to some, and they're truly disrupting lives, but they're disrupting systems that need disruption for a reformation. So
Yeah.
hopefully our leaders will have leaders that will rise up and begin to build, not rebuild, but build from and build into the future for what it is that we have been disenfranchised from. I
Yes.
appreciate that insight. Thank you for that. I feel your passion and your insight about what has happened historically is very, very important too. Let's go to our next question, which I think many of our people may be able to relate to, and that is about the movement with digital revolution. Now we
Mm,
have through the digital footprint, the digital and social technologies, we can be anywhere in the world. People that are now relocating, there was a move through Ghana, bringing people back to Africa, so on and so forth. I hope to see those movements continue, but for people that may be interested in supporting, engaging, now that we don't have borders digitally, or we can, I guess they could limit that. But
mm.
now that we have a little bit more latitude, what can we do in our digital space to move with this revolution of Africa rising and a new awakening?
Oh, that's a great question. And I love that so much because that's, at the center of my work, right?
Mhm.
Um, as you know, on at our family, our breakdown family, we have a global audience and
Yes.
we have heated conversations where, around the world, from the Caribbean to, Europe to the US and Africa. And that's the power of digital media, right? It
Mhm.
has collapsed distance. That's the best way to put it. It's collapsed distance. And for the first time in history, a young person in Accra, Nairobi, Kingston, London, or wherever can be in the same conversation in real time. And
Awesome.
that's powerful,
Yeah.
right? Because Pan Africanism used to require conferences, right? Remember Pan African
Yes,
Congress?
yes, yes.
It used to require conferences and,
Mhm.
and physical travel, but now it can happen on timelines. It can happen in comments. It can happen in live streams, like what we're doing now. So it has democratized consciousness and made people more aware. You don't need institutional backing to engage in continental conversation about sovereignty, debt, minerals, culture, or identity. And what that represents for us is an
Mhm.
opportunity to take the idea of Pan-Africanism from a merely ideological concept, right, to a practical
Good.
movement.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, now with that comes, like anything that's revolutionary and new, there are risks. What do you see risk, or are there any areas that you can identify that would be um, insightful for non-Africans, the people that are not on the continent that are
Mm.
reaching back digitally? How do we protect ourselves and make sure we're connecting with the source or the individuals we think we are? Because obviously there's lots of opportunity for fraudulent
Oh, yeah.
activity.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So, the opportunity is very clear. Digital Pan Africanism can build solidarity, It can build awareness and economic collaboration, which is, what excites me the most about
Yes.
this moment.
Mhm.
But the risks are very, very real as well. Number one is misinformation today, which spreads just as fast and sometimes even faster than the truth. Okay. And then also, external factors can definitely manipulate, narratives or even fund platforms for their own objectives. Governments, both African and foreign, monitor digital activism and outrage. That's one of the things that I'm seeing is outrage can replace strategy,
Sure. Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
it's important that we don't get caught up in that. I think, digital awakening without institutional grounding is dangerous for
Yeah.
our
That's a good
community.
point. That's a
And
good.
so one of the things that I talk about a lot is for us to think about what the next phase of this looks like,
Mhm.
right? And for me, it's being able to move from online consciousness to offline institution building. So that's why on PanaGenius TV, we're not just stopping at the daily breakdowns. We're building community, right? We're doing additional content that will bring us together and really, is looking at how we build institutions from this community, because
Right.
that's what's going to move the needle. So my advice to people is, number one is to do your own research, right? Don't
Right.
believe
Mhm.
anything that you hear. Always do your own research and make sure that whatever platforms that you're following, that the information that you're following have been validated, right? By at least two or three or more other platforms, right? Credibility is so, so important for this day and age. And so that requires some work,
Yeah.
right? From us, from the audience. So that's the first step. And then I think alignment, looking at what those people are building, right? Beyond just a platform. Are they thinking about institution building? Are they trying to move the conversation forward? Are they trying to change policy, trying to mobilize? What are the strategic goals? I think those are all very, very important, right? For our generation today. And I think one of the most powerful things that has happened and what this time has offered us is, the power to reshape our narrative through
Yes.
independent media.
Yes. I
Because
think.
Charlene,
Mhm.
before you'd have to go knock on, BBC's door, CNN's door to
Al
get your,
Jazeera.
or
Yes.
just,
Yeah.
to get
Yeah.
your story out, but no more.
Mhm.
No more. Many of these, of independent media platforms and voices are reaching far more people than traditional media or corporate media,
Yeah.
right? And so it's a great time for us because that gives us an opportunity to have a voice. Going back to how you started this episode, which was about the lion, until the
Yeah.
lion learns how to speak, right?
The
The
hunter.
story will always glorify the hunter. And
Yes.
that's what we're saying. We need to own our story. We need to own our narratives. And that, requires investment from the audience, from the community investment. But I think if we do it right, this can be a game changer for
Yeah.
us.
And I thank you for that insight, and definitely doing our due diligence to research and learn about other platforms or those that we connect with. I'm looking forward to putting up all of your socials at the end of this so that people can perhaps connect with you, support you as a source, because you have become the trusted source that I look to when I see anything that comes across about what's happening, and I keep up with African news. As a matter of fact, let me tell you, and then we're going to move into another topic that I think is very, very essential.
Mhm.
I've traveled to 5 African countries.
Oh,
I
wow.
was last in Ghana in 2023. On the way to Ghana, we get this security alert about the heightened security for traveling to the areas we're going to travel.
Mm,
And so I was very concerned, and I thought, well, we're getting this alert from the state, but there's nothing happening once we got on the ground. There was no sense of any kind of
mm,
disturbance, uprising. And it dawned on me how easily, when we don't have credible news reporting or credible reporters that we can literally, our narrative can be shaped by an agenda.
Yeah.
And that was
Yeah.
an awakening for me. And so I started looking for other independent sources, and that's how I came across you. And I'm so thankful that I did.
Wow. Thank
But
you. No, thank you. I'm glad you
absolutely.
did.
Yeah, I'm glad I did. Let's talk about another key happening right now with the Sahel Alliance and what's happening with AES there. That is very prominent in some of my news sources of the Europe, the US, and with select countries on the continent. And
Yeah.
this vying for sovereignty, and the old system is still trying to hold fast. Let's talk about that a little bit.
Oh, Charlene, when it comes to the AES, I've got to ask, how much time do we have? How much time?
We got another 15 minutes to wrap it up. 40
Oh,
minutes,
that's tough.
another 20 minutes max to wrap it up. So give us those
Thank
real
you.
salient points.
Yes, no, I will. And I would say that for anyone who really wants to know more about the AES, follow our channel, because at least once a week, I'm bringing a report from the AES, because
You're
what they're
reporting.
doing. Yeah, I have a personal interest in their story because, for my generation, we've never witnessed anything like that, right? An African nation or a leader that is really standing up to and just reimagining sovereignty, right, on the continent. So I've been keenly following, the story and watching to see how everything pans out. But the Sahel Alliance, or more formally known as the Alliance of Sahel States, is a political and security pact, right, between Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. And it emerged after military-led governments in those countries expelled French forces and distanced themselves from ECOWAS and Western security frameworks. Now, why did it emerge? Well, because for over a decade, Western military interventions in the Sahel have failed to stop jihadist expansion, and violence have increased despite heavy foreign presence on the ground. So the alliance is, in essence, a response to perceived failure, to what they believe has not worked. Well, if we have French troops on the ground for this many years, why do we still have this amount of violence, in the region? So they said, all right, we'll try something else. So they kicked out the French, built an alliance, and they're doing something that has really, it's unprecedented. So it represents three governments saying that we will handle our security architecture differently, but they're even moving beyond security to economic, right, and other areas of collaboration. Now, whether that model succeeds is an open question, right? Which is why, as I said, I'm watching it very closely. But its emergence reflects very deep frustration, right, with just the condition in the area and the previous security order, and just a region that has so much promise, but it has consistently been dealing with violence, and poverty, as well. So they're trying to rewrite the rule. And we're following to see, we're hoping and praying for them to see how far they go.
Well, that's major progress for those countries to align themselves and to say, no, the model that we've been living under does not work. We're not going to continue that. And sometimes it takes exploration to figure out what's going to work. But
exactly,
it's said that it's insanity to keep doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results, right?
And that is the general sentiment across the continent. I mean, before I started reporting on the AES, I had no idea how people felt about, military leaders. Personally, I am not a fan of military leaders, right? It's not something that has worked for the continent. I was not, so coming in, I was, one of those people with my, that raised my eyebrow. I was like, I was definitely.
Are we going to have dictatorship, huh?
Exactly. Because history warns us,
Yes.
history warns us. But right now, when you look at the continent, people are just tired.
Yeah.
People are tired. Democracy hasn't worked for them. That's what they say. Democracy hasn't worked.
Mhm.
Nothing seems to be working for the continent. So, the AES, they're trying something new. We don't
Yeah.
know what it is,
Yeah.
right? What we know is they're not acting like previous dictators,
Yeah.
right?
That's good.
They're
Yeah.
they're
They seem to
they're
be working in concern and concert for the good of the people and the country.
right,
Yeah.
right.
Mhm.
So their actions don't really match the way, their history or their politics.
Predecessors, yes,
It
yes.
doesn't add up. It's
Mhm,
something different.
mhm.
So they want to give them a chance. That's what I'm gonna say. People want
Well,
to give them a chance and see.
keep us updated on that because I myself and others that I know are interested in visiting and even looking at other opportunities in Africa and would
Yeah,
definitely like to be a part of the movement or the emergence of a new building of Africa. Definitely
yeah,
for our future, for our children, and from education to the hospital system to every social system, just working so people can be lifted up. I think
yeah.
every person, no matter what the system may be, that's the end goal. People want to see something that works and make life better for them and their families, right?
Absolutely. No, absolutely. And I'm glad that you said that because, um, you know, ah, and it's Africa needs allies,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
It needs, let me start by saying it needs its, global Black family first and foremost. And that's why I am very passionate about using my platform to bridge the gap,
Yeah.
right? And this is something that fundamentally our leaders, Pan-African leaders,
Mhm,
understood.
mhm,
Even MLK, Martin Luther King Jr., when he was in Africa, he witnessed Ghana's independence.
mhm,
And, when he went and returned in his sermon, The Birth of a Nation,
mhm.
one of the things he said was that I wish above all things that Black Americans would return home
Yeah. Yeah.
and contribute their expertise to the development of this new country.
I see that and I hear that more and more as a cry from African leaders, as a plea. Come home, use your
Yeah,
talent, your gifts, your expertise, your technologies, your sciences, because the truth is, I believe this. I've heard this said, but I believe this. Though we contribute to the improvement and the progress of the whole globe in every sector of society.
yes. Oh, yes.
If we went home, if we went back to Africa and we used our resources, we would be what Gaddafi intended, and that is a superpower and a powerful player on any world stage. Do you see that being a
Oh, abs
possibility?
a million and 10%. A
Yes.
million and 10%. And especially now,
Mhm,
right, where Africa is really asserting agency or sovereignty,
mhm,
especially now where the continent is awakening.
mhm.
We need our brothers and sisters to come, me included, right? Me
Yeah.
included.
Well,
We need to,
especially with America and what's
yeah,
happening with Africans, Black people all over, but African
yeah,
Americans, people are tired of just trying to fit into or have a sense of belonging when we're not accepted, but our contributions, our culture, our
yeah,
talents, and all that we bring is embraced, but our individuality and our collective people group is rejected or resisted. Uh,
yeah,
I was in Ghana and I felt like I was literally literally at home. I mean,
yeah,
I walked the
yeah,
street. I spent 14 days, and there are things that are different. There are opportunities for resources that are not as available, but the
right.
possibility of that happening, I could see the possibility of a transform. But it does start with the decolonizing
Yeah,
of the mind,
yeah.
right?
And as you're saying, I mean, you hit the nail on the head that it's really about the possibility.
Mhm.
What can we build? And one of the things that I often say is if America built, if Black America built America,
If that's it.
if Okay, that is the reality.
Uh-huh.
Black America is the foundation of this country,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
How much more if we were to take, those skills and the innovation and the expertise and the strength, and
Yes.
everything else that you can imagine, if we were to take that to the motherland and say, we will build our continent. Hey, Charlene, we've done it before. We built America, so why not?
Yeah, it's
We can
obvious we're
build the
capable of doing it.
motherland.
It's
Yes,
obvious we're capable of doing it, right?
we're capable of doing. We've
Yeah.
done it before. It's
Yeah.
nothing new. It's
Yeah.
just a matter of willpower, desire. Do we want to? Do we
Yes.
want to? And that is my wish, that before I die, in some way I will see the continent united with
Yeah.
its global Black family in a very powerful way, not just culturally or socially, but especially economically,
Economically. Yes.
because that's where our power lies.
That's where the wealth of the globe lies, in Africa. My
Yeah.
Lord, the wealth that's there. So, but let's move on. We can come back for that session for
I
sure,
know.
right? Let's wrap it up. We've got just a few more minutes. Let's wrap it up with propaganda versus legitimate African news. We've kind of touched on it throughout the entire
Hmm.
podcast. But what are some key points that you can give us? You said do your research and know your connections, or find out who you're engaging with. Are they building? What's their goals and visions? Is there
Yeah.
anything else that you would share with us about being able to delineate between propaganda, such as the news of destabilizing events in Africa, but they're also orchestrated. They're not just because Africa is unstable. They're orchestrated events to keep
Yeah.
Africa destabilized.
Yeah. I mean, that is, a big problem. And honestly, the only way that we can combat that is to invest in more of our own platforms, right? We need more of
Mhm,
our own platforms.
mhm.
That is the only way, because if it's a fight, right, for who can win the audience.
Mhm.
And today people have a short attention span.
Yes.
Very short attention span. So it's about making sure that our community, our outlets, our channels are well equipped, that they can fight, right? And when I talk about fight, I mean in the media landscape,
Yes.
that they really have agency,
Mhm.
because they're well funded, they're well resourced. And that is really what it comes down to. For me, I think that's what it really comes down to. But in terms, if we have more people like me, right, like
Yes.
in different platforms, different channels, doing what I do, I really care. For me, a lot of the times people will write to me when there's a breaking news, like, oh, Sandra, when are you going to cover this? Can you cover this immediately? And I said, no, I need to do my research. I
Yes.
need to spend more time on this, right? Because I want to make sure that I'm bringing factual information, at least to the best of my ability. That is important, right? And so investing in more platforms like PanaGenius that cares about the truth
Mhm. Mhm.
is critical. And that's the only way that we fight, right? The time that we're in and the challenges that we're facing. And I believe that if we can overcome this, if we can invest, if we can pay attention, and create more platforms,
Yeah.
then we scale, we multiply, and we begin to own the narrative, which is really what it's about.
Absolutely. And so as we're wrapping up, I would say, I joined your Substack, and I don't get a chance to read everything because you publish 4 times a day.
I try most days. Yes.
You publish frequently, but what I'm interested in, I go looking. You're the source that I go looking for. So we're
Thank
gonna
you.
wrap it up, but I want to have you just kind of give us some closing remarks on maybe specifically a point that you want to leave us. You've talked about us building. You've talked about the collective power. You've given us insight about what's actually happening. What would be your closing remarks to our audience as we speak to Africa rising, a new awakening? Leave us with
Yeah.
something that we can move forward to.
Yeah. No, thank you, Charlene. I think what I want to leave with our audience today is, number one is, first of all, if you're here, then I believe that you're paying attention. So that's great. That's a starting point. So I
Mhm.
would say continue to pay attention. Continue to pay attention. But beyond paying attention, I want everyone to know that you are not an outsider to Africa's story or Africa's rise. You're not an outsider. You are actually strategic partners in it. Okay. The diaspora represents capital, influence, political leverage, cultural power, and institutional knowledge. Black Americans in particular understand how to build movements, how to shape media narratives, how to influence policy, and create scalable businesses in very complex systems. That experience is valuable. Africa's rise will not be powered by sentiment alone. So we can just watch and root for it, or we can be a part of the change. It's going to be powered by networks such as this, and trade networks, media networks, investment networks, political networks. And the diaspora sits right inside of some of the most powerful networks that, Africa can utilize and leverage for its growth, for its next chapter, to build its next chapter. So the role isn't just clarity or, staying informed. That's important. That's important. And it's also not just about returning. I urge everyone to return. That's very, very important, but it has to go beyond that, right? When investment, when Africa, Black America, and its allies, when we move from symbolic unity to structured economic, right, and institutional partnerships, that's when we start to see a real recalculation and acceleration. So that to me is the biggest opportunity of this moment. Is I don't want, I encourage people to not just be spectators, to not just be listeners, right? On my show, I'm always asking people to chime in, to propose ideas, to propose solutions, because it's really important to me that this is not just another summit that we're having, right? But that we see ourselves as the solution to Africa's problems, the real architects of its future. And everyone has a role to play in that future. Everyone.
Sandra, it's been a pleasure. This conversation has been rich and meaningful. I'm going to close out with the quote by Chinua
Achebe.
Okay, him. Until the lions have their own historians, the history of the hunt will always glorify the hunter. We're asking you, if you hear a clarion call in your heart to become an investor, a participant, a partner, an ally to the awakening of Africa, and don't just stand on the sidelines, get engaged and be involved. And one of the ways that you can do that is simply by following and supporting people like Sandra. She is I believe, a trusted global news voice, and particularly concerning Black America and Africa and Africans, although she speaks to many other geopolitical topics. But literally, I want you to join her, follow her, and support her on her social medias. We have her website, Instagram, Linktree, and if you need to know anything, subscribe to her Substack. She will keep you well informed. So I want to thank you, Sandra, again for joining us. I want to thank our audience for joining us for the 2026 Black History Podcast. Be sure to stay tuned so that you won't miss one session. We will continue the Black History Podcast through March the 4th. We have some great upcoming sessions. We have a session on navigating healthcare. We had to revise that schedule due to a personal matter with the professional that's going to be a part of that. But you don't want to miss Navigating Healthcare with Confidence on February 25th. And then we have someone who's very special to me, a young man that was a part of our congregation in our life before he even went to college. Now he's married. David and Catherine King own their own technology company, and he's going to be presenting AI technology on Wednesday, March 4th. We'll be back on next week, 7 p.m. Central, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And to keep up with what we're doing and what's happening with We Need a Village Again, stay tuned and follow us on all of our social medias. Listen, God bless you. We're changing the narrative. The hunter will not tell our story. We will tell our story, and we will build forward into our legacy. God bless. Thank you, Sandra. It's been a delight.
Charlene, thank you very much. This has been wonderful. And I just want to say, anyone who wants to learn more about Africa beyond the headlines, I also just released my State of Africa report. It's on my website, sandrababu-boateng.com. So make sure you get a copy, because that will put everything that we just discussed today into much more better context and perspective for you.
Awesome.
Thank you again, Charlene, for having me.
God bless. Thank you.
Okay.
We're still standing. We rise in the face of every adversity. We rise to reclaim our dignity. We rise to honor our legends and our leaders. We rise to renew the hope of our people. We rise to lay hold of justice and prosperity. We rise in strength and solidarity. We rise for our children yet to be born. We rise to the glory of our Lord. We rise with a predestined victory. We rise for a better day. We shall not be erased. We rise up.